All right, this is Return of the Peanut Gallery, episode
51.
I have no idea. 51, maybe 52. I don't know.
Do the clap.
All right, hey, welcome back to our online studio. We are back recording.
The peanut gallery's back, baby!
All two of our fans are very excited to hear us. We have them here with us. We are back recording, and we want to launch the season with. Before we left, we talked about the reason we were going to take a pause was we really wanted to focus on a project that we were really passionate about, something we really felt was powerful and needed our full attention. And so we have spent a lot of time and energy into it. And so one of the things we want to do early on with these episodes is talk to some of our board members, some of our donors, some of the people who have really jumped in and kind of explain why we care about the Malahide Athletics Center, which is the project that we have been spending a lot of time into. And it's a big part of, well, I guess the Peanut Gallery is how we connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just, I think I randomly one day just sent you guys a text because I saw a couple of the episodes and said, hey, I'd like a shirt, just because I was really engaged in a lot of the stuff that you were discussing. And I guess that's, kind of our introduction to each other.
Yeah,
it feels like a long time ago now.
Did
Right.
we ever get him a shirt?
No,
No, you didn't.
No. Listen, we are a broke podcast. We can't just be giving shirts away.
Yeah, we don't have enough viewers to make that. Sponsorships are welcome.
But yeah, it's been interesting because we started there, and I remember we went to Johnny's, our local establishment we love, but we went there, sat down, and kind of go, look, I love that you love the podcast, but we got another thing for you. We had no idea kind of necessarily where you were in terms of sports or even community. We had just barely met you. And so then we found out you love your basketball and you love your sports, and that just kind of all plowed into where we've been the last couple of years. So we figured it'd be good to get together and kind of share some of that. So why don't we start with a little bit of who is this Paul Leeking guy? When it's because your name has been big in Aylmer, because a lot of people who have felt the impact of the generosity of you as a person, as an individual, even just kind of your presence and stuff. And so a lot of different organizations have had the name Thanks Paul Leeking posted on social media in different places. But I don't know if a lot of people actually know who you are. And so.
Yeah, no. Well, first off, thanks for having me here.
Yeah.
This is my first ever actual podcast that I've done. So I'm sure that this is going to be a little clumsy, so I'll do my best here. But you kind of summed it up perfectly, and I appreciate all those organizations. So my name's Paul, married to my wife, Lisa. We have 6 kids, blended family, so we go all the way from ages 25 to 1 year. Sports is huge in our family. It's been big in our family since I was young. How did we get to Aylmer? Well, just the way that it happens to go with my business interest is you kind of get transferred around the country a little bit. And so we spent a little bit of time in Marathon, Ontario in the north for the sort of the COVID period, and then an opportunity to take a store in Aylmer came up just towards the end of COVID. So we jumped on it. Didn't know much about the community when we kind of got here, other than I went to the University of Western Ontario, so I kind of knew the area a little bit. Not enough to know Aylmer real well, but sort of did some research and took a trip down here and met with some people, some local people. We thought, this is the kind of spot that we wanted to be, so we bought a house, and we've kind of been here ever since. And it's funny because, just talking to you about, the sports thing, and I know there's a clip of this going around, but it really, for me, it was even before that, that I started to know that I was going to get involved in some way with whatever was going to happen with the progression of sports in this area. It goes back to being in the Elgin Innovation Center and seeing the Aylmer Pirates up there practicing, and in the middle of this dusty warehouse, and just realizing there's just such a need for something here. But I was thankful that started to get to know the board and some people around it, and did a couple fundraisers events at the store that I thought were a great way to sort of introduce ourselves into the community. Yeah. And so here I am.
So what's your history of sports? So I'll tell you mine a little bit, because I think people make assumptions now, because I coach a lot. I'm involved in sports. And so I heard this again the other day. Somebody's like, you must have been great when you were young. I was like, you have no idea. I was not. And so I grew up, my parents are first generation immigrants, and so I'm second generation. But so we didn't play a whole lot of sports. So growing up in Mexico, like for my parents, this what we consider normal here was not normal. I mean, there are no organized sports where they grew up. This was not something that you would give of your time to. Like it was very much. And so moving up here, my whole sports world was literally pond hockey with the neighbor boys, street hockey, and then playing school sports until we got to high school. And then I played a sport called priming tobacco, which was also a great sport. But we worked. And so you work in tobacco. I did that fall and spring. And so then by the time I got back, most of the high school sports were kind of going. And so in high school, though, I did play grade 9 basketball. I know you've watched me play, and you. But then in grade 10, and this is why I find it funny that I'm involved in this. In grade 10, I started playing basketball, and then about half the season in, I was like, you know what? This is really killing my social life, and so I just quit. And that was kind of my personality. I loved playing sports. I loved the social part of it. Even to this day, I'm somewhat competitive, but for the most part, I enjoy going to be with people. And so then when you watch my boys play and they have such competitive edge, I'm like, that is not from the father's side, not whatsoever. But the impact for me with sports was significant in terms of just building friendships. So being first generation immigrant. So then a lot of my friends in high school, because we didn't have any, like I had no cousins up here. I had any family. Christmases, unless we went to Mexico, I mean, we were alone. And so that's where you built most of your connections. But then going into youth, so for me at least, church was a big part of life. But that's where we started playing softball, and that's where most of my relations with a lot of the older men in the church was through sports. And you get out, and there's a church league that ran that played baseball in, and so you built a lot of those connections. And so for me, it's always been very relational. This is where I go, and I get to hang out with people. But I never experienced any of the higher level competitive stuff or anything. I don't know if I would have cared growing up differently or had more opportunities, but it was about being people.
It's funny that you say that because it's amazing, like the similarities. So like when I think back to my early days of why a sporting life was so important to me, my first memories are with my father. So my father was a 40-year high school English teacher, Georgetown District High School in Georgetown, Ontario. Did a couple stints in Burlington as well. And he coached basketball right from day one. So from the time he was a young teacher in his early 20s right through till somehow after he was retired, he was still coaching. And so I was that little guy that was going out at, 4 or 5 years old every weekend. Some of my friends were at maybe hockey rinks, and I never really picked up hockey, but I was always with dad at the basketball tournament. So I was always around, young people. I was always around coaches. I was taking stats, at like, 6, 7 years old. So I really had an appreciation for just spending time with dad. Right. Because, as a teacher, he has such a responsibility to so many kids and so many things that any time that I could get with him was special. And so he made a real point to coach my teams as well. So like I played fast pitch when I was a kid, like the area I grew up in Acton, Ontario. We didn't have hardball, like fast, like overhand. We had like windmill. And so that's kind of where I started playing baseball. That was kind of my first love as a actual playing sport. And I can remember my sister was a really, really good fast pitch player. Like she went to, Canadian championships on teams that my dad was involved with. And so like every weekend there was always something in our house, a tournament. There was always a tournament going on. And I can always remember that through the entire week, through school, through all the different things that were happening, that was the thing that I would look forward to the most. And of course, this is before, and I know we're the old guys now, this is before the internet and phones and all that kind of stuff. So really there wasn't anything else.
Did you guys have hydro or indoor plumbing or anything? Or like how far back are we going?
But it's a feeling that you get. You call it butterflies, you call it like, the heartbeat's a little bit different when you think about something that you really want to do.
Right.
And even to this day, like, through our joint sort of endeavors, like we run an adult basketball league right now that runs out of Malahide. Right. And I get the same feelings that I did when I was 5 years old that I am now into my 40s, just being around it. Right. Because I think there's just so many good things that happen when you're together with people. Yeah. And whether it's sports or school or work or church or whatever it happens to be, the more we're together, I think the further we move as humans, like in the right direction. And
Yeah.
I think what happens is, there's so much going on especially for kids now, so many confusing things. And it's just like phones and internet and social media, all these different things that just try and divide,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I've always just found that sporting events bring people together.
Yep.
And so it's interesting that your memories are very similar to mine, even though it was kind of the scope was totally different.
Right. I was thinking when you said that, it's interesting with even the way sports work, because fast pitch was a big deal out here as well. So Josie's or my wife's younger brother played in the same thing. Like that was huge. Every small town had one.
Mm-hmm.
And my guess would be somewhere along the Blue Jays' success, some of that changed to more people wanting, but it's just interesting, some of the development of sports and what that meant to a community. So a community out here, so my brother played for Stratfordville, he played in Richmond, and he played in all these tiny little communities. And now you don't see anything coming out of those little, everything is kind of amalgamated. We're seeing this with local hockey, like everything is becoming bigger centers. You're doing a lot more travel. And so a lot of, I think what we remember about it, there are some aspects, that would be a whole other episode, but there's some aspects of the way sports are done now that has removed some of that.
Well, it's interesting because when you were in school, if you think back even to elementary school and you had recess or lunch or the different, all my memories right through up till grade 7, 8, all we did was play sports.
Yeah.
Whether it was foot hockey, we played out just with a tennis ball, or we'd play baseball in the springtime and we'd have a running score that would go between the three intersections of time. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from. I'm not around schools enough now to know if that still happens. You have younger kids that are in right now. My kids are a little bit older and a little bit before, but is that still going on?
I think it depends a little bit on the age group and the people. So I would say Aiden and his buddies, there was a lot where, my grade 9er, he's all sports. Same with my second, all sports. But there's other groups that they just have never really been into sports. And so I think it depends a little bit on the circle. So where I live and a lot of my social circles, we're a little bit odd in how much involvement our kids are in sports. So when they're out there, it's all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. So now all of our friends are kind of like that too. So from everything I know about Davenport, McGregor, all those, I think most of that is still somewhat similar.
Mm-hmm.
I know it.
Is it the same though? When you pass by the school grounds, I don't see nice basketball nets with meshes hanging there. I don't see the same emphasis that I experienced when I was in school, because for us it was the same thing. Kickball hockey was legit. As long as you had a ball cap and you had a tennis ball, there's so many things you could do.
Mm-hmm.
Baseball, all you needed was one bat that some kid smuggled in, and if you had a tennis ball and your ball cap, you had a game going.
Yeah.
We had basketball courts that they put in, they were awesome. We were on those things all the time. I don't see that being something that happens now in the same way, the emphasis or the dollars being put into that.
But do you think that's just in response to what kids are doing? Because all the stats, and we've gathered a bunch of stats through our athletic center research stuff, all the stats are pointing to kids are getting out less. They're more anxious. They're less likely to do a lot of those activities. Is that just kind of a response to say, well, kids aren't using it anyway? Or is it just a misguided direction? Because I'm shocked how few gyms there are and how little people put energy into it from a government side of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But obviously I don't know. I would be,
I almost feel like it's one of those generational things that we've talked about in here, where as you've seen the clubs, the Optimus Club, the Lions Club, and the different organizations who had an emphasis on pouring money into communities and developing the communities. Once those things kind of got developed, the next group used them, but then the group that followed really didn't have a push to build anything else.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So then the purpose of them being built to give the kids a space to play kind of lost its meaning in the home for those that were driving towards that. So then the parents who would take their kids to those playgrounds, now those kids weren't really taking their kids as much to the playgrounds anymore, because it was kind of it was just something that was there. They've moved on to something else that's kind of newer in their community, and we've lost that kind of connection to when all those original places were first put in.
Well, it's also interesting because when you think about those, or for at least for myself, I had a core group of friends, and again, we were sports every day, 7 days a week. It was at school. It was on Saturdays, on Sundays. And what was remarkable is that if you were an adult and sort of sat back and would have watched what we did, like we made the rules up of what we were playing, right? They were fair. We made teams that were fair, right? We like included people. We never said that person can't play or that person can't play. It was always, hey, who wants to play? Okay, you got him, you got him, you got him. Like it didn't need any kind of intervention to like organically go.
Right.
And it just, I feel like we've lost some of that. And even like I noticed just in the business, like we have a lot of, 14, 15, 16-year-olds that have started to come through over the last couple of years. And I've noticed that it seems like every 3 or 4 years, it does become the young adults are becoming a little bit more reserved, right? A little bit more anxious. And whether that's a result of what social media does to your mind, right? Where you're trying to like live your life through somebody else versus living your own life. Like it's harder to get even something as simple as like a Christmas party, right? Like we're seeing it really difficult to drag like a 16-year-old kid out to a Christmas party at, in December where, even 10 years ago, they couldn't wait to go.
Right.
And so I think it's both. I think it's generational. And I think that, yes, exactly what Patrick was mentioning about like generations have created and then a generation kind of enjoys it. And I think we're just kind of coming around the circle again where like I don't meet people that are reasonable who don't say, I wish my child was doing more athletically or to do with sports or to do with any kind of club. Because I've thought about this like the last while, like it used to always be about the physical aspect of sports, right? Just being physically healthy.
Right.
But I think I've changed my point on it now. It's the mental health part.
Right.
I think that like even for myself, I remember we moved. Dad took a different job at a different school. So we moved from Acton to Burlington when I was in grade 6. And so I didn't know anybody, right? So I didn't have any friends, nothing. What saved me was basketball. I just started shooting after school at the local hoop that was attached to the school after school. And eventually a couple other kids in my grade started playing and boom, all of a sudden there's 4 friends that I've now had for life. I still play with 2 of the guys on my team in Burlington, almost 40 years later. And so I wonder generationally, yes, there's an issue, but regardless of that, like we can't fight big tech. We're not equipped to do that kind of thing locally, but I mean, we are equipped to do some things. And I think that's kind of where we're finding common ground.
Right. Okay, so based on what you're saying, one of my thoughts is motives of parents when it comes to a lot of this, and I wonder how much they've changed. So what I see a lot, especially because we live rurally, right? And so a lot of my circle of people that I would know would say, well, I don't need to put my kids in sports because I don't care if they make it anywhere. The only reason you'd sign your kids up for rep sports is because you have an illusion or you're trying to, live your dreams through them. And while there is some of that, I just wonder if some of that has really caused some damage. Like the competitive, it has changed. Sports have changed drastically since when I was a kid. I know hockey was still crazy back then. I think there was still much of a drive to make it, but like even now with baseball, and you get some of the programs in our region that are sending kids off to D1 US schools from Canada playing baseball, but it is intense. And so then in these circles, you kind of go, I don't need that for my kid. My kid I don't care if they make it anywhere. And so then you just don't sign them up. But the point of sports was never to make it somewhere. The point of sports was because it taught you a lot about life and it allowed you to make friends and face different situations. Like I think of my oldest, he first year playing St. Thomas. And so a very competitive kid, very skilled, but I mean, they're young. And his first time getting, their butts kicked and just the tears of losing and learning that. But I wonder have we gotten so focused on our kids making it somewhere that we lose some of the vision of building community and building relationships and that. Have you seen that? Like, is that what you felt growing up? Was there any of that type of conversation about we're going to make it somewhere, we're going to go somewhere, we're trying to make it to the NHL, NFL, any of that? Because I feel like that's a lot now.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is like the loss of the house league.
Yes.
Right? Like house league sports, even 10, 15 years ago, were much more prevalent than they are today.
Right.
Because we have completely made and this is where, as parents, I mean, we have to look at ourselves a little bit inwardly, because parents have kind of monopolized and taken over some of this to a point where, like, it's funny because you and we've talked about before, like we could have a pretty good debate about, is it better to put your child into a rep program, or is it better to put your child into a house league program?
Right.
And I think I could make a pretty good case that says, especially up until a certain age, like maybe if you want to call it just entering high school, that house league is really the way to go. Right. Because, I mean, hockey's a whole different story, just because there's a lot of expense involved in hockey. But the stuff that we're talking about, you know, with the center specifically, like basketball, volleyball, baseball, like these are all things that are very affordable,
right?
Like comparatively.
Right.
And there is no reason why you can't have the same kind of sporting experience playing in a house league of 8 teams than you could in trying to get that quest to Division I. Now, right. I think there are situations where, because I played pretty high competitive football in high school, we were a nationally ranked program at the school that I played at. And like we used to travel to the U.S. and play like actual teams from Ohio that were like, you know, 3A, 4A schools, and we'd get our, you know what, smacked around a little bit, but it was still fun. And so like I've been on both sides of it. Played very, very competitive basketball through high school. Got a lot of joy out of that. But I still think back to the times, and even grades 5 to 8, going to house league programs on a Saturday morning that were just as fun. Right. And I didn't know the difference.
Right.
Like everybody loves tournaments, right? Like tournaments are always the thing. Like kids, parents, everybody loves them. And I often wonder, and I see like some of these hockey parents that are going like to, 15 tournaments a year all over the province. And I'm thinking like, is that really the best thing? And so maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not a child psychologist.
Right.
But what I do know is that there's just as much value in those grassroots sandlot programs if you've got the volunteers and the people to do them.
Right.
And specifically, I think something we had mentioned is like even adults playing in house league programs. I think that is just as big.
Right.
Because like we sometimes get lost in work and family and all the different things that challenges us. But I tell you, like I run 2 separate men's leagues in 2 different cities. I've coached high school basketball at the senior levels. I've been involved with like adult baseball programs, soccer programs, and I can tell you that you'll never see somebody more at their best right after a game. Because like the exertion that it produces, like the chemicals that it releases to get you back to square, I just think it's something that we're missing culturally. And perhaps that's why, we've pulled kids away from it, because we as adults have kind of pulled ourselves away from it.
Yeah, you know what? And I was thinking when we were in Bolivia, and so I have friends who moved down there, and so they're working with a lot of people who are isolated, people who are struggling. But one of the things that they did was, as a community, because they don't have a lot of the other stuff, they're pretty out in the middle of nowhere. Like you don't have access to most of the amenities we do. But they got together and they played volleyball. And everybody showed up, and it was such a community building thing. And when we look back, a generation or two, they talk about sandlot baseball and they talk about parks and just showing up and playing sports. But I think one of our drives with all of this is you can't have kids show up and do that when they can't have a facility to go in and do that.
Yep.
Like the reason, we could go play these sports was because there was facilities that were cheap enough to go do it. Whereas now everything costs so much money. And I get the arena piece. Arenas are expensive. Everybody in Aylmer who hears this will have an opinion on arenas. I get that. But the rest of it, where are those facilities for kids to be able to go play sports and have fun and just enjoy and be able to do it cheaply? And that was, I think, a big part of our drive is you see the impact that it has on kids' lives. We felt the impact. It doesn't need to be competitive. It can be. If you're good enough and you love being competitive, great. But that's not the goal. The goal is, can we create a space for a community that's very divided, and I'm just going to speak to our region because I don't think I can solve the whole world, but in our little part of the world, playing sports together does massive things for bringing unity. Just a little example we had. So one of my kids plays hockey, and if you play hockey in Aylmer, there's a rivalry. We don't like Tillsonburg. That's just the way it is. And it's kind of what makes sports fun, right? You have those cities you don't like. So then he played spring hockey and happened to have a few of those Tillsonburg kids on his team. And now all of a sudden you have connections. And so now when we play Tillsonburg in baseball or hockey or something, you look forward to playing against these kids and you look forward because you have a connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you think of Tillsonburg, they're not just that bratty team that we didn't like. Those are my buddies.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that power we downplay.
Mm-hmm.
What can we as a community do where we can say we're divided on religious lines, we're divided on, economic lines, we're divided on political lines. We have all these divides. What are the things that we agree on? Well, we agree that it's good to get together and have some fun.
Mm.
Could we get together and, play soccer, play football, and teach our kids to just enjoy being relationally with other people while exerting themselves? And then I think from the flip side, the other thing, and you mentioned that already, was the adults. Like we can talk about the kids being on their phones, but my guess is most of the kids who struggle on their phones have parents who struggle on their phones.
Yes.
Right? Like that's usually how that rolls. And so I think that's been, for me at least, one of my big drivers is, yes, my kids are competitive. Yes, my kids hope to get, some university playing time in some sport. But my driver for this is community. I don't see a better way to be able to build connections and relationships and to do that in a healthy way than to be able to establish these local house league type programs where it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter. You're going to be able to show up and you can play and you don't have to be great because no one's trying to make it somewhere. We're just trying to have a fun game.
Yeah, it's funny because you said something about like you can't change the world. You can only kind of change our little community and worry about that. And I often wonder, like, these places, and if I think about like in the United States, the really tough areas like in Baltimore and Detroit, and there's all this debate about the different things that should happen in those areas to try to resurrect them, right?
Right.
Try to save them, get crime under control, get the populations moving in the right direction. And like if I could just do anything, I could, play Sim City, right? Like for all those who have ever played that game before, and I could just start over. It would just be community center after community center after community
Right.
center after community center, packed with gyms, packed with swimming pools, packed with whatever you needed
Right.
to give people something to do.
Right.
Because that's really what it also comes down to. It's just like, if you're a kid who's, at that age of, 5, 6, 7, you just want something to do.
Yep.
And I think if you start building a relationship with sports early, like we all did, I think that just translates over the course of your life.
Right.
So, but my question for you though, Albert, is like, why do you think that it's become such an issue now? Like, why is we're not the smartest people in town, right? Like, so why is this only coming to fruition over the course of, say, the last year and a half since we've really started to put an effort into this?
Clarify quickly for me. What do you mean? What is coming into fruition? Like
just the vision of something like this. Like the vision that says we need this.
Right.
Like there's been one high school gym in Aylmer for how many years?
Yeah.
Right. So facility, the area long before I was ever here has been facility poor. So why is it just now that it's becoming, more prevalent or more needed?
I am going to argue that it has never. This isn't a new debate. I feel like we have just gotten together a strong enough team that's determined to make this happen. And what we have faced in doing this, and we have a diverse team. We have a bank manager, we have store owners, we have people with high-level sports experience, we have people who are, Christian, people who aren't, people like it's a diverse, great group of people working towards this. And the amount of roadblocks that we face from people in trying to get something like this built and talking to some other people who've had a vision like this before, it quickly dies. And I think there's an element in our region, and I can only again speak for ours, where everybody's waiting for someone else to do it. And so the talk about having a better facility, it's been there forever. But I think COVID obviously made it worse. I do think the data coming out from cell phone usage and the impact that that's having on kids, I think inflation, where it's really starting to separate those economic classes and you're starting to see more and more people having to work longer hours. I think the fact that there's almost no such thing as a one-income house anymore. Those are a lot of factors. So when both parents are working and I got to get my kid to a 5 o'clock game in St. Thomas, that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. How do I do supper and homework and everything? So I think there's a lot of things that came together. And then I think there was just the right timing. I mean, obviously I'm a faith person, so I would say there was some form of, for me and Patrick at least, where we felt, compelled to do something. And then you start getting other voices into it and you go, okay, I think we're seeing a gap in our community. Why don't we jump in and try to do something about it? I think along the way, if you were to ask me this question 5 years ago, I would have the answer, well, nobody else is doing anything. Nobody else. Like, we're the only ones who care. Because you get kind of into that mentality.
Mm.
But now over the last 5 years, I've found that to be so far from the truth. There are so many incredible people in our community who are working, whether it's the Kinsman, the Optimist, whether it's just people putting something together, in their house. Allie Neville with the teens for the toys for teens for Christmas, all those kind of things. There's so many, but something of this magnitude, I think there's been a lot of dreams of, but it just kind of the right people came together at the right time. And so I think we just need to plow ahead, but there's a lot of people that see it. I think, there's so many thoughts. I'll finish with this one, but I do think we've gotten into a mentality of waiting for the government to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was heading that way. Yeah. Okay.
So I think there's a piece where we have given so much away to the government, and some of it they've done a great job. I mean, you get healthcare, we have retirement homes, we have a lot of those things that we've kind of said, okay, we pay taxes, so can you take care of that? And so a facility like this, it would be really nice. I mean, the town's built an arena. Surely, somebody should pay for this. And so I think some of that mentality hurts the smaller towns because there isn't enough money for this. Mm-hmm. And so then us, the smaller towns, we kind of got to go, no. If we want this for our kids, if we want this for our next generation, we're going to have to do the bulk of the work for it. And that's a huge team effort. So,
yeah, because I the more you think about this, and I think you're exactly right. Like the difference for what I see, because I've thought about, like, I grew up in a small town, right, that needed something like this. I was fortunate enough where I've lived in a lot of cities in Canada where there are facilities like this, and I know that there are similar facilities in places like London, but it's still far enough that it makes it difficult.
Right.
But I think that there is a model in kind of what we are looking at, what we're doing, that like any small town community across Canada, across North America, across the world could follow, which is you just got to have enough people that believe in something, right? And really believe it. And it always comes down to, with the belief is the why. And you have to really, in order to believe it, you have to understand why you're doing it. And it's because I don't think you can find a negative reason to not have people being active, right? I can't. I've debated everybody on every subject to do with physical education that you could possibly imagine, and it always comes back to, yes, this is a good thing. And like going through COVID and all those different things, and we're all worried about, vaccinations and medications and all this different stuff. And really, one of the big solutions is we all could have just been more active. Right. And that's the kind of thing that, just the getting people together to do it in a common space goes back in human history, how many thousands of years, that's when the best things of humanity come out. Right. And I just think that, I still feel like there's a lot of difficult work in front of us, but I feel like we're moving towards it. And every day, inch by inch, we put another brick down. And I just think that there's a lot of communities out there with a lot of similar people thinking the same way that we are, that just need to go and start having conversations with each other about, where does this even start?
Right. Well, in one of my temptations over the last year, because it got hard over the last year, right? Like we started off with a big bang. We raised a couple, $1.5 million, something like that. And that all came pretty easy. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now we got to really work for it. And we had to do a ton of work last year. And you're tempted to just kind of go, you know what, it's too much work. It is what it is. But one of my inspirations, though, has always been what I've seen at Family Central. So Family Central is another project that a lot of us are involved in. But when it began, there was no vision for something like this. And so we had an investor, we had a couple of us with a vision, but the vision wasn't to do food security. The vision was literally, how do we take a space downtown and bless the community and bless families? And so that was basically it. We start with that. It was a lot of work and a lot of failure. And we tried a few programs and they didn't work. And you kind of bounce around a little bit. And we tried a restaurant, which did some really good things, but then financially wasn't viable. And now over the last 2 or 3 years, you're running a food security program and you're seeing people who are struggling so deeply on so many levels, being able to find relationship in a safe place where they're being fed well and they're starting to get help. And now we're starting to be recognized. The government has sent us several awards. We've received other awards. People are noticing. But it took a lot of work. And I think in some of this, there's a piece of me that goes, we are doing something that is way too big for a small town. This is a vision that should be in London. What do you think in doing this in Aylmer? Mm. And so I think there's also a piece of that where we just need to keep driving ahead going, no. There are kids in Burwell, there are kids in Vienna, there are kids in Bruce, there are kids in Mount Salem, there are kids in all these communities that need a space. And if we don't do something about it, like how long are we going to wait? How many more statistics do we need saying this next generation is struggling? But it's not even just the next generation. Adults are struggling. Like it's crazy some of the stats you're hearing post-COVID. And so I would argue the same thing. We need to build a space for adults to become healthier, for them to regain a joy and love for community. Because if you're on social media, and again, I know we talk maybe too much about it, but it divides so unbelievably much. Mm. But when you're in your basketball league, you guys don't talk politics. You don't talk, but you got some buddies we're playing basketball with.
Well, it's amazing how inclusive a basketball team can be, right? Or a basketball league even. You know, you might have people from competing like companies that are on different teams. And they'll compete hard against each other. But at the end of the game, like everybody's slapping high fives and saying good game and all just talking about their kids and their families and enjoying because the exertion has happened. Right. It's built into us as humans that we need to get this angst out.
Yes.
And the more that we look at a phone, the more we stay on a computer, the more that angst builds. Right? And I'm not someone who knows all the science of how it all works. But all I know is every time that I play a sport, I feel better. Right. And I have never found a person yet who will say, I feel worse than I did when I started this.
Right. Well, and I think, my last thought here is we can complain and we can say we got to do something about tech and we got to do this, or you can create an opportunity for something for the kids to enjoy that's a better story. Hey, look, yelling at your kid to get off the phone, fine. But if there's nothing for them to do, they're going to do something. And that's likely going to be back on the path of least resistance, which is some form of screamed event. But what would it look like in a generation if instead we had access to every sport basically you can dream of? This isn't about building one sport. All right, the athletic center is, you got your court sports, you got your turf sports. We got a front of house that's got all sorts of other options. What if that became the norm? Like, no, you're going to, twice a week, you're going to go play whatever. Or you're going to, one of the people that we talked to was talking about, flying their planes in there. It doesn't even have, but getting out socially, doing something. What does that look like in a generation to reverse the trend of isolation and loneliness and anxiety? And so I think that's kind of our approach. Like you say, we're not the smartest guys. What we do know, though, is that when people get together, the result is better. And if we want to try to unite a community, we think this is one part of a significant solution. And so...
bang on.
All right, brother. Hey, thanks for your time. Appreciate this. I know how much you love photos and love social media and love putting your picture everywhere. So we appreciate you doing this.
It's been a time.
For those curious, go over to malahiteathleticcenter.com for more information about how you can learn more about the MAC and maybe come alongside us and see this project completed in our little community.
I really like that because it almost felt like we had transitioned to a commercial for those interested in. It was good. It was really good.
Stay tuned for more.
All right. Hey, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.